Okay, so we're at the next part is called My Son, Son. Like my son, and then son, like S-U-N, the son. I was 14 the first time Owen forced himself on me. We were lying on the crusty carpet of his mother's condominium. It was early morning, and I was so exhausted that I could barely keep my eyes open. I wanted water, but there was none. I remember the way his skinny jeans tightened over his erection. Ew. And I remember the dirty shoelace he used as a belt. Jesus, girl. I told my parents I was sleeping over at a friend's house so I could stay out all night and go to house parties. Owen, who was 16, had said that's what I should do. He'd positioned himself as my guide to a new school and a new world. I believed he was my way into meeting new people. It was only later that I realized he didn't have many friends himself. My status as the hot freshman girl was what got him the invite to those house parties in the first place. I remember his freckled skin and pale stomach and how his nose started bleeding when he was on top of me. It's the Accutane, he said, blood dripping onto my collarbone. Jesus. His blood was so red it looked fake, as if it came from a bottle of ketchup. The texture was thick as syrup. He wasn't embarrassed. I remember the way that red looked against his bright blue eyes. I remember his long blonde eyelashes as they blinked, elegant and in slow motion as he held his hands to his nose. When Owen got my number and texted me to hang out over the weekend initially, I'd lied to him. My mom's family's in town, so I'll be spending time with them, sorry. I reread the text silently before I hit send. A perfectly reasonable excuse, I thought, closing the screen and hoping he'd go away. Ha ha, he responded immediately. Who hangs out with their family all weekend? We can go out after you're done with them. There will be a cool party on Saturday. We can go, too. I'll drive. I was embarrassed. How could I be such a child to think that hanging out with family was a valid excuse to miss parties? Jesus. Sorry. I was in high school now. I needed to act like it. Besides, I didn't want to be with my parents on the weekends anyway. Okay, I wrote back. I didn't know how to say no. I never felt safe with Owen and always wanted to go home when I was with him. But I suppose home didn't feel right either. He, seemed like the real world. This was high school. This was being an adult. Scary and out of control. Just the way everyone said it would be. I wanted to rise to the occasion, prove I was ready to handle it. One night, Owen drove to an empty parking lot and started to kiss me. I thought I had to kiss him back since he'd taken me to a few parties, so I let him fumble in my pants with his hand. I wish someone had explained to me that I owed him nothing. I wish someone had instructed me not to get into his red truck at all. I wish that when the cops pulled up, I'd told them that a part of me was relieved to see them. I wish they hadn't said I was on the wrong path, that I could end up doing drugs, that I was bad, and had instead said, "We're worried about you. You're still a kid. Let us take you home. This isn't your fault." I wish that a couple of years later when, breathless and sobbing, I'd revealed to my mom that I wasn't a virgin, she'd hugged me instead of looking disappointed. I didn't give her the details, Owen, the carpet, the blood. I only said that I'd had sex. We were in her car, pulled over a few blocks from her sister's house. I was in the passenger seat, still not old enough to drive. The fabric of the seat was hot against my back. We wondered, but we were sure, not Emily, she said, her eyes fixed on the windshield. I could see her already thinking about how she'd share this news with my father. I winced. She exhaled. We're late to see my family. Her tongue clicked against the roof of her mouth. She started the car back up. I took deep breaths and slowly managed to calm down. I tasted my snot and bit my upper lip. I felt gutted, as if my insides had been hollowed out. My body was light and fragile, like a shell doomed to shatter, as I walked through my aunt's front door, a bell jingling as it swung open. I greeted my extended family, feeling my uncle's cool skin against my cheek when I hugged him, knowing that they'd be even more disapproving of me than my mother had been. I felt bad for her, sorry to have confessed something about myself that was so shameful she now had to hide it. I wanted to curl up and fall asleep forever, but instead I sat in the shadows of my aunt's yard and pretended to smile. Owen came over to my parents' house once, unexpectedly. I remember how animated and sloppy he seemed as I opened our front door and he stepped into the living room. An air of drama surrounded him. His skin was red and his eyes glassy. My dad and I were fighting, he announced, gasping, his face contorting. I was awkward as we sat on a wooden bench on the back deck. Owen laid his head in my lap, and thick tears streamed down his nose. I looked at his profile, his large features, and the red pockmarks on his face. Everything about him seemed fresh and raw, like a wound that had just broken open. His eyelids were practically translucent. I shifted uncomfortably beneath the weight of his head. I wasn't sure what to do with my hands. I could sense my mother's eyes on us, watching through the glass of her bedroom door. The house was quiet. My parents stayed inside and out of sight. It seemed as if everyone understood the role I was supposed to play. I inhaled and drew up a memory of how I thought a woman behaved when she comforted a man. Maybe it was a moment from a movie. I wasn't sure. My mother had told me about her high school boyfriend, Jim, that he came from an unhappy home and had often slept in her family's couch. What did she do when Jim came over? I tried to embody that version of my mother, her love for Jim. I pushed away my tangle of confusion and slowly, very slowly, touched the curls in Owen's hair. "It's okay," I said tentatively. "I'm so sorry, Owen." I whispered with more confidence. "I'm so sorry, Owen." I whispered with more confidence. The warmth of his hot face radiated against my thighs. Jesus, why is she making me read this? I like this book. I'm enjoying it. I really am. I find it to be relatable. I feel really sorry for her. I know a lot of women have, the exact same experience. But, yeah, I'll be glad when I'm done with this one. And I'm on page 38 of 159, so I'm trying to power through. Anyways, she's comforting this dude. Soother of the weary, achy brow, It felt good to do what was expected of me, but something about my comforting of him wasn't right. I had been cast as the loving and concerned girlfriend, but I didn't want the part. After Owen left, my mother said to me, "I'll never forget what you looked like, his big head in your lap." She'd witnessed something theatrical. Poor Owen, she added. When I started hanging out with Sadie and the other popular girls, they scoffed if Owen approached us. "He's kind of gross, Emily," they'd say. I didn't like the way they looked at him, but it also felt good to have someone say I shouldn't be with him. Their disapproval gave me permission to avoid him. I began to feel more confident about ignoring his texts and less afraid of abandoning him. After I finally broke up with Owen, or rather, after I escaped him, I was riddled with guilt. Food was unappetizing. I couldn't sleep. Knowing Owen might show up at my parents' house or hurt himself to spite me, which he had threatened to do. My phone buzzed late into the night with text after text. He was relentless. He'd sit in his dad's blue VW Bug across the street from my house, just in sight of the window of my living room. The blue stood out unnaturally against the foliage of the street. It was the same color as his eyes, both milky and crisp at once. By the time I was 15, Owen had stopped parking across the street. One night, I made plans to go drinking with a group of girls who weren't really my friends. I'd never spent time with them outside of school. They were cooler than me, or at least it felt that way. They all lived in big tract houses, with walk-in closets and parents who never seemed to be home. We got ready for the night at one of those houses, in a pink room with a full-length mirror, watching ourselves and each other as we tried on outfits. One girl used a Sharpie on our arms to tally the shots of vodka we were knocking back. I remember tripping over a pile of clothes and looking down at the black lines that started at my elbow and traveled down to my wrist. The next thing I knew, we were in a dark parking lot next to a car that smelled like leather. A grocery store sign glowed in the distance. My mouth was slick, and my stomach felt tight, and I could not stop throwing up. I could not hold myself up. The girls exchanged looks, annoyed, as they held my hair back from my face. The boy who was driving us must have called Owen, because suddenly his truck was there, and he was pulling me off the asphalt and dragging me away. I'd not spoken to him in months. I squeezed the arm of one of the girls and tried to conjure the words to tell her... Okay, sorry, technical difficulties. I tried to conjure the words to tell her that he was not safe, but she'd already turned away. He'd come to claim me, and they thought of me as his. I woke up with Owen on top of me. I was in a small bed in a blue room. I tried to use my arms to push against his chest, to force him off and away, but I was too weak and too drunk. My vision flickered with ghostly white shapes in blue light. My mouth felt like cotton, and I could taste the smell of his skin. I wanted it to be over, but I didn't know what to do, so I shut my eyes tightly and made small noises, the noises I thought women were supposed to make during sex. Why did my 15-year-old self not scream at the top of her lungs? Why did I whimper and moan softly instead? Who had taught me not to scream? I hated myself. The next morning, I walked up my parents' driveway in clothes that were not mine, and mumbled 2 or 3 words about being tired. I got in the bath and made the water as hot as possible, but I couldn't stop shivering. I lay there for a long time. watching my skin turn red from the heat. I was barely able to move. Every limb felt impossibly heavy, and my whole body ached. It was a bright day, and the light in the bathroom was yellow. The walls seemed high, and I felt tiny. The blonde hairs on my arms stood up straight against the faded black Sharpie lines. I slept deeply that night. When I woke, I found that I was a new and different version of myself. I dressed carefully, ate plain toast, and sat quietly next to my father as he drove me to school. I looked ahead out of the window, my seatbelt on, hands delicately placed in my lap. I didn't tell anyone what had happened that weekend with Owen. This is what you do. This is the beginning of how you forget. What felt like a lifetime later, but was closer to a year, Owen texted me again. He was no longer at my school, and I had a new boyfriend and a different set of friends. He wrote long paragraphs, manic blocks of text, that arrived on my phone with a whoosh. Sorry. He told me that he'd been in and out of rehab for heroin, and that he'd lost 20 pounds, and that a girl from another high school had accused him of raping her at a party. Things had been really bad, he said. I shouldn't be alive. No, you shouldn't, man. I didn't respond. I was afraid that if I replied, he would somehow draw me back into his life. Someone else filled in the details of the rape accusation for me. The girl had been very drunk at a house party. She'd ended up in a bedroom, away from the rest of the party, barely conscious. Owen had come into the room and taken advantage of her. She and her family were pressing charges. Good. When I first heard this, I couldn't stop thinking about the girl Owen had hurt. I pictured her home. I pictured her father. I imagined her hair and her room. I could see her saying confidently, I didn't want that, without shame, without blaming herself. Why hadn't I developed that skill? I longed to be more like her. I wanted to be able to say, I didn't want him, to myself and to my friends and to the whole damn world. I told my mother about the girl, what she said Owen did, her parents. Well, she trailed off. She seemed displeased, as if I'd brought up something that wasn't polite or appropriate. I could tell she didn't know what to say. I remember feeling gruff and tougher than her. I lived in the Wild West, a place where terrible, unspeakable things happened every day, and she was a lady. It felt like my responsibility to protect her from those types of horrors. I didn't let myself be disappointed that she hadn't said more. It was better this way. I'm sorry. Better that she couldn't offer insight or comfort. The less I needed from her, the less opportunity she had to let me down. I did eventually tell a girlfriend about Owen. We were high, and I was lying on her soft mattress and gazing at the string of lights she'd woven into her bed frame. I told her about him and his red truck and the black lines on my arm. My friend was sitting cross-legged on the edge of her bed. She had a lip piercing, and I remember watching her bite it while she stared at me, listening. That sounds like rape, Emily. My head snapped over to her. What? No, I said quickly. I blinked and turned back to the ceiling, feeling dizzy. I knew she was right. I was 19 in an airport. This is like a news section. There's a little, divider there. I was 19 in an airport in the Midwest, waiting for a connecting flight back to California after a quick catalog shoot, when I learned that Owen was gone forever. At that point, I was used to flying by myself and navigating airports, used to sitting on cold linoleum floors and falling asleep in uncomfortable chairs and moving through crowds of people. I was sitting cross-legged, charging my phone in an outlet low to the ground, scrolling through Facebook when on my iPhone. Why does she always has to say that it's her iPhone? On my iPhone, when I saw the update. An older boy from high school had written his name and R.I.P. My first thought was that he'd misspelled Owen's last name. He'd be so sad to see that, I thought. But of course they'd misspelled his name. He'd never had any real friends. My chest tightened. Man, good, he's dead. And he didn't have friends. Sucks that he got to be alive and rape so many people, doesn't it? What happened? Is this real? I texted a few old acquaintances to see if they had any information. Some part of me already knew the answer. It wasn't until I was jammed into my middle seat and the flight was beginning to ascend that I finally got a response. It's real. He passed away. I read the words as the pressure of the cabin pushed me down into my seat. The plane lifted into the air. My ears rang. He was gone. His flesh, his eyes. He was no longer pulsing with blood and life. He was no longer anywhere. I would never have to see him again. Are you all right? A woman in the aisle seat next to me asked quietly. The roar of the plane nearly drowned out her voice. I'm sorry, I said. I just found out that the first boyfriend I ever had, he's dead. I felt my tongue swell. She laced her brows together. I'm so sorry. She sounded so genuine that I wondered for a second if she'd ever known this feeling, this mix of loss and relief over the death of someone who'd hurt her. I wondered how to articulate it, to her, to anyone. I put the tray table down and rested my face in my hands. Owen had died of a heroin overdose, alone, at 21. His body was locked in the guest house he'd been renting, locked in there for 3 days before anyone figured out where he was. The police had to break down the door. A fitting death for Owen. Probably could have been more painful than, I don't know. I attended the funeral alone and chose to stand at the back of the crowd. We were on a cliff above the ocean. The sky was endless blue. I squinted my eyes to watch Owen's father speak. He said that when the police brought Owen's body out from the guest house, he'd sobbed. His beautiful baby boy was dead. He'd said, "My son, feel the sun," as the California sun beat down on Owen's pale, lifeless body. "My son, son, son," he wailed. A few weeks after I'd told Owen I didn't want to see him anymore, he'd driven us to a college 45 minutes out of town, paying for gas with crumpled and filthy dollar bills he'd made by working construction. "Just let me take you to this concert," he'd texted me. He'd gotten the tickets months before, and I still wanted to go. I wanted to prove to myself that I was in control, that I wasn't vulnerable to his manipulations. "Okay, but we're going as friends," I clarified. "As friends," he agreed. I made sure to wear new clothes that he'd never seen before, and white boots I'd picked up at a thrift store that made me feel older and self-assured. I acted distant and unbothered when he picked me up. This was the kind of thing adult women did, hang out with guys they'd once been intimate with but no longer were. He stood behind me, not touching me, as we watched the concert. The lights lowered as the band began to sing a quiet ballad. Oh yeah, that's that song, that "Love of mine, someday you will die," "Follow you into the dark." That's so cringe, though, that she had to listen to that song with this dude that, fucking raped her. I don't know if this happened after he raped her. Yeah. Gross. Sitting on the plane, I felt the memory of Owen standing behind me. Tears rolled down my face. I cried, but not because I wouldn't see him again. I cried because I couldn't believe I was the type of person who'd gone to that concert with him, who'd unwillingly lost my virginity to him. I cried because, unlike the girl who'd accused him of rape, I hadn't been able to say I was violated. I cried because I felt guilty for abandoning Owen. I cried because I hadn't left him earlier. I cried because I was sure that I was someone who did not deserve to be safe. I cried because I was sure that I was someone who did not deserve to be safe. Yeah, I feel that. I cried for the loss of a different life, one that was full of experiences and people of my choosing. I cried because I didn't feel like the heroine of my own life. I cried because I was ashamed of being so incapable of control. "Please, never come find me," I whispered into my palms underneath the hum of the plane. "I don't want to be in the dark with you." And then firmly, "Owen, no." Toxic. I was 16 on February 16th, 2007, when pictures of Britney Spears shaving her head hit the internet. At that time, I was smoking pot every day after school, having regular and unprotected sex with an older boyfriend who never once brought me to orgasm, and working as a model, driving myself up to LA from San Diego a couple of times a month, and skipping class for photo shoots. That was the year I posed for a surfing magazine as their Taste of the Month. I was tanned and topless in the picture, wearing only a black bikini bottom, turned away from the camera, my bare back making the shape of an S. I coyly looked over my shoulder, my mouth open, a little surprise in my eyes. I was a junior in high school. No one could have missed the image of Britney leaning toward the mirror, wild-eyed and smeared with mascara, delicately holding a clipper in her hand, intently shaving her head. She is smiling in the photo, elated, like she just heard a good joke and is enjoying it. Strands of long brown hair still cling to the crown of her head, a reminder that Britney had once been here. That same year, I helped Sadie, a girl I knew from school, sign with my modeling agency. She had more of a fashion model's body than I ever did. She stood 5'9" and weighed no more than 110 pounds, whereas I was considered short and curvy, a swim girl, my agents told me when they took my measurements. All her life, Sadie had heard that she had had the right physique for fashion, even when she was just a kid, surfing and dreaming of being an athlete. She had Amazonian legs, built to run and kick, as if ready for battle. She parted her jet black hair to the side, securing it with a simple barrette and scooping it into a precise ponytail that sat on the nape of her neck. In profile, she was mostly cheekbone, with a wide button nose and pillowy red lips. Her swan neck looked as if it could easily twist all the way around or dip toward the ground like a slinky. Even when she wore white lacy baby doll dresses and delicate droplet earrings, Sadie seemed dangerous, like she was built of weapons she had yet to master. Sadie lived 10 minutes away from our high school, in a gated community off the 101, and was mostly friends with boys, specifically one cool older group. They called themselves the Scab Crew. That's so cool. Wow. Drawing the letters SC all over their skateboards. That's a cool older group. Coolest thing I've ever fucking heard. The Scab Crew? Yeah. She'd get stoned with them at lunch. From the windows of my third period Spanish class, I'd watch her stride back to campus, late. She'd swing open the heavy door of our room, mutter sorry half-heartedly, and plunk herself down in a plastic chair in the back. Our eyes would meet, and she'd grin as she unwrapped the foil around a giant burrito, which she'd proceed to eat loudly, cementing her bad girl reputation. My dad was the painting My dad was the painting teacher at our high school. The academy was an alternative public school in the district. It functioned on a system of quarters instead of semesters and offered classes like skate PE. We had a surf team, but no football. On gray Saturday mornings, the popular upper-class girls would wake up early and drive to various beaches to watch the surf team compete. They'd stand barefoot in the sand, wearing zip-up hoodies over their bikinis and waving their hands in the air, screaming the boys' nicknames from the shore. I'd transferred to the academy from middle school, knowing no one but my father and a few of his fellow teachers. My dad wore flip-flops every day and wouldn't take attendance until the end of class. To have his class after lunch was the dream. You could come back as late as you wanted, and stoned, too. Everyone was convinced that my dad's policies were lax because he was a former hippie and pothead, but I knew that wasn't true. He simply enjoyed his reputation as a chill teacher. The cute guys on the surf team adored him, calling him Rata. Rata's a legend, they'd say, their eyes red and their skin freckled from too much sun. Rata, I don't know, I think they say it like Rata. The year before I arrived, my dad told some of the surf team boys that his daughter was coming to the school in the fall. Keep an eye on her, he said. I bet they will. On the first day of my freshman year, I put on a thin red tank dress over a push-up bra and rode to school with my dad in the cab of his Toyota pickup truck. The academy had no dress code, and I was thrilled to be able to wear whatever I wanted. It felt new, an exhilarating adult freedom. I walked to classes, keeping my head still as upper-class boys passed by me, exclaiming loudly enough for me to hear, "Yo, that's Rata's daughter. She's hot, dude." I gripped my 3-ring binder to my chest. Later, word got around that Rata's daughter models. It wasn't just the way I looked that made the boys notice me. It was also my perceived status in the outside world as an attractive girl. I was scared by the older boys' attention, but also glad. The way I looked was getting me noticed in a new school, and I was grateful not to be invisible. Sadie was often with those boys. She had all their numbers in her phone, saved under their nicknames. She knew which classes they were taking, what plans they had for the weekend, where they lived, and which girls they thought were hot, remembering the names of the freshmen with big boobs and the sophomores with bedroom eyes. She made sure to say hi to these girls and compliment them on their outfits when she saw them in the hallway. This is how she and I started spending time together. Within a few months, the boys began inviting me to lunch off campus. I'd awkwardly accept and meet them in the parking lot, surveying the crowd for a familiar black ponytail. We'd usually spend our 30 minutes talking about my dad. "Have you ever smoked with him?" they'd ask, peering at me from the driver's seat. No. The pretty, popular girls took note of who grabbed the boys' attention, watching me climb into their Nissans and Toyotas with suspicion and interest. Some chose to be mean or ignore me completely. Sadie decided to bring me closer. Yeah. Popular girls. They'll do that. On weekends, she'd drive a packed car full of boys around to their skate spots. Her boyfriend Mike always sat shoddy. I always thought that sounds weird. Like, just say he sat shotgun. Pulling a furiously heavy U-turn, she'd screech to a stop beside me, her head sticking all the way out the window, both hands on the wheel, her long arms extended forward. "Emski, get in!" she'd shout. "Get in, loser, we're going shopping." I'd crawl into the cramped back seat, balancing on a guy's lap, ducking to avoid hitting my head on the car's roof as she put her foot on the gas and tore out. Before she started modeling, Sadie had a job as a cashier at a sandwich place by the beach. I was impressed that she always had cash on hand. From my tips, she'd say, as she pulled out a handful of dollars to pay for gas, burritos, handles of alcohol, purchased by any means, our terrible fake ID, friends who were older, spontaneous shopping trips, whatever she wanted. She was only a year older than me, but I felt as if she were an adult and I a kid. When Sadie got drunk at house parties, she'd stand in the street in front of her parked car and play fight with one of the scab crew, usually whichever guy was the most fucked up. She'd laugh deeply and kick suddenly and expertly high in the air, her hands clenched into tight fists near her chest. She was taller than most of the guys, and at some point they'd tell her they'd had enough. I like Sadie. Chill, Sadie, seriously. Some of them, though, liked this opportunity to hurt her. When that happened, I'd usually move a couple steps away and nervously pretend to text. But Sadie seemed to especially enjoy the fighting when one of them got into it, grabbing her wrists and pushing against her as hard as he could. She wanted the challenge. She seemed to want to feel them try to hurt her. Eventually the guy would succeed, and Sadie would throw herself to the ground, collapsing, legs splayed. I remember her crying then, lying on the cement, wailing. When I got on my knees to comfort her, she'd jolt up abruptly and push past me, frowning and chasing after one of the guys, never so much as glancing my way. When we arrived at parties together, I knew that, from the outside, we made sense as friends. But when we were alone together, without anyone there to watch us, I was unsure as to what Sadie wanted from me. She seemed to know how to act in any situation, how to be cool with the right people and disregard those of no consequence. She wore the right shoes for any occasion, laughed at jokes that everyone but me understood, and shoplifted like a pro, managing to steal her prom dress from our shared department store fitting room as I walked dutifully to the cashier to pay for mine. What could I offer her, other than the occasional emotional drunken fit, which seemed mostly like a simple bid for attention? She appeared solid. She understood the world so much more clearly than I did. She might have been born at 17, long-legged and aloof. Swerving around town, her car loaded with the scab crew. She was a natural at navigating the world of boys. I could only hope to learn from her. Brittany went fucking crazy, Sadie whispered in the middle of our computer class, pulling up the infamous picture on her screen. This was the era of Lindsay Lohan stumbling out of clubs, white powder on her nose, underwear, or the lack of it, peeking out between stick-thin legs, of Amy Winehouse's tiny hips and bloated midriff and big hair. We were used to these images, but when Brittany shaved her head, it was something different, something we couldn't understand. We studied the picture and wrinkled our noses. She looks fucking ugly, Sadie sneered. I felt angry. Brittany was destroying the girl I'd once idolized. As an only child who'd spent an inordinate amount of time with her baby boomer parents, I missed a lot of the socializing and pop culture that my peers experienced. I remember watching the precocious girls in my 5th grade class dance to Christina Aguilera's Genie in a Bottle, mesmerized and full of envy and curiosity as they swung their hips in perfect coordination. 12-year-old girls in matching low-rise black jeans and crop tops, moving together as one organism. I didn't have a Spice Girls phase, and I didn't know the words to any Backstreet Boys songs. Yeah, that was me. I had the fucking choreographed dances to Spice Girls and Britney. Female socialization is fucking weird. It's weird how some of us conform to it so easily. I never saw High School Musical or The Simple Life. My parents refused to let me watch television at home. But I did have Britney. One Christmas, I specifically asked for Britney's debut album, Baby One More Time. I was fascinated by her expression in the video for the eponymous song, the way her eyes looked innocently up into the camera, her face framed by pink pom-poms and pigtails. She was at school, in uniform, and I wanted to know, how Britney did it, how she looked so enticing, even within the confines of school and all its rules. I played the CD for my mother, wanting to share in my excitement. It was a rainy Christmas, and the clunky CD player was perched on a windowsill. I danced in front of it and sang along. "She's good, right?" I asked. My mother made a face, scrunching up her nose. "Not to me. I don't like it." I rolled my eyes and kept dancing, chalking up her disdain to our different tastes and generational divide. I couldn't understand that she might have an objection to songs like Born to Make You Happy, in which 17-year-old Britney sings, "I don't know how to live without your love. I was born to make you happy." Maybe my mother hadn't been aware of the lyrics, though. I don't know. When we all learned that Britney lost her virginity to Justin Timberlake, I was 12 and desperately wanted to ask my parents about it. I wanted to know if that was okay, or whether she had done something really bad, even unforgivable. Were they mad at her for having sex? Had she betrayed her fans, and me, specifically? What would happen to Britney now that she was no longer the same? Even as Britney transformed and lost her innocence... Jesus, I'm sorry. I don't know if the background noise is you can hear it or not. Even as Britney transformed and lost her innocent image, one thing remained the same. She was singular. The only women who regularly appeared around her were backup dancers, placed strategically to draw more attention to the main attraction. Other female pop stars were competitors, neither friends or allies. Gossip magazines made visual diagrams comparing Britney to her antithesis, Christina Aguilera. When they were finally paired together at the MTV Awards, it was only to sexually swap spit with one another and Madonna. The message was clear. When women are together, it is only for the titillation of men. 1 year after Britney lost her virginity, I got my first flip phone and made the ringer the instrumental version of I'm a Slave for You. I knew all the lyrics by heart. Oh baby, don't you want to dance up on me? Are you ready? Leaving behind my name and age. I always had Britney's face in mind when I listened to her songs, how her puppy dog eyes would swell curiously as if we'd caught her by surprise, interrupting her, and how she would stare at us, even into us, quizzically and earnestly. What do you need? She seemed to be asking. Wow. Okay, we're at half an hour, and I reached another little break in the text, and so I'm probably going to end this, but I just liked that what she just said about Britney. I'm going to read it again. And I always had Britney's face in mind when I listened to her songs, how her puppy dog eyes would swell curiously as if we'd caught her by surprise, interrupting her, and how she would stare at us, even into us, quizzically and earnestly. What do you need? She seemed to be asking. Okay, well, I'll do the next one when I have time.